Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today's interview is a whopper. I spoke with Paul Solotaroff, who's been a senior writer for Rolling Stone for 25 years. He writes about denial of justice, about people who have been horrifically abused, like NFL retirees with brain injuries, Iraqi veterans, and he covers the drug crisis throughout the decades. Unfortunately, today, the people who are being horrifically abused and exploited are children on Snapchat. Paul just released an expose on the Snapchat drug trade, and parents everywhere need to listen to this one. We had the tough conversation. What Paul revealed will shock you, and hopefully parents will start to join together and require platforms to be safer for kids, or we're not going to let our kids on them. Here we go, jumping into my conversation with Paul Solotaroff of Rolling Stone. Paul, you released a pretty damning feature yesterday in Rolling Stone magazine called Inside Snapchat's Teen Opioid Crisis. I want to read the subhead. So, law enforcement and grieving families allege that the social media giant Snapchat has helped fuel a teen overdose epidemic across the country, and now parents are fighting back. So where and when did this start? What inspired you to dig into this issue?
So a little brief on me. I have been unlucky enough to report the front lines of every deadly drug pandemic since crack. 1988, I found myself on the west side docks of Lower Manhattan, reporting my first ever story called Dead Boys, about 10, 12, 14-year-old kids, boys, who'd been kicked out of or run away from single room occupancy hotels with their crackhead moms and were selling what was called survival sex on the docks of the West Side Highway to married men driving home after work to their wives and children in New Jersey. From there, the crystal meth explosion in the Pacific Northwest that migrated to the Midwest and finally East. From there, the synthetic heroin die-off in 2014, 15, 16 in the Northeast corridor of the United States. And a couple of years ago, my phone started to ring about this new phenomenon, white boy narcos. These children in the middle of nowhere, USA, places like Salt Lake City, desert towns in Southern California, the middle of nowhere, South Bronx, who had made their way to the dark side, specifically to a darknet site called Alpha Bay, where you could buy anything your little demon heart desired. A baby jaguar, a contract killer, do something awful to your ex, child porn material. But what these kids were going to Alpha Bay for was to order bricks of fentanyl from Wuhan province, and a week later it would show up on their doorstep, courtesy of that great new drug mule, the United States Postal Service. Here we were in 21, 22, and those kids, unlike the Dominican kids a decade before, didn't turn that fentanyl into synthetic heroin. They were turning it into fake pills, fake oxys, fake Percocets, Adderalls, Xanax, and selling them on social media where every child in the country could see them. Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and making extraordinary amounts of money overnight. What cost them 4 cents to make, a fake OxyContin 30 would sell for $35 on Snapchat. Although these dealers were advertising their product across all social media, what the DEA was telling me then and then called me last summer about was one site in particular where so many of these drug deals closed, and that was on Snapchat. Last summer, I got a call from a top Department of Justice official who said, Paul, we're not only helpless, we're desperate. We have been trying to get the word out about counterfeit prescription medications being sold to 10, 12, 14-year-old kids on social media, and we're not breaking through. Meanwhile, a half dozen kids are dying every day. And they're not those kids. They're everybody's kids. They're our kids. They're the smartest kids in their class. They're the most sensitive, the most curious, the ones we can least afford to lose. And we are losing them because these babies who have been terribly impacted by the lockdown, by the terrible losses they sustained during COVID, social, emotional, all those ties, all of that feeling of being alive, being in a tribe that just went away in the spring of 2020 and was never recovered. These kids can't get to sleep at night. They're depressed. And so they go online looking to self medicate with what they think is an Adderall or a Percocet. And of course, it's just fentanyl. And their mommies are waking up at 7:30, knocking on their door to get them ready for school. Open the door and find that their beautiful 14-year-old has been dead for 6 hours and is fixed in what the feds call the fentanyl death pose. Blue-lipped, wooden-chested, arms flung out, a shade of blue no parent should ever have to discover in nature. One of the first calls I made to report that piece was to Amy Neville, who is an American hero. My mind, the Erin Brockovich of the fake pill crisis. A woman who walked in days after her 8th grader had graduated middle school. This gorgeous 14-year-old named Alexander Neville. Beautiful, curious, insanely smart. Mm-hmm. Kid who could give seminars on the embalming process in ancient Egypt. Mm-hmm. Collected tiny replicas of canoptic jars. That was Alex Neville at 3. And by 14, he was this gorgeous, wildly popular kid with an ADHD problem who had begun to self-medicate with marijuana. Marijuana didn't do it for him, and he bought a handful of what he thought were Percocets from a sociopath on Snapchat who used the handle AJ Smokey. Smokey was a very loud user of Snapchat. Smokey was an MS-13 gangster, still is for all I know, who had taken to Snapchat when presumably all the other dealers working on street corners, schoolyards, nightclubs, darknet migrated to where all the kids in America were at the start of the pandemic, namely social media. And this guy allegedly, but probably, killed 3 kids in the span of 4 weeks. Alexander Neville took a Percocet on, I believe, June 23rd, 2020, died instantly. A month later, 6 weeks later, his mother, Amy, gets a ping on Facebook Messenger from a complete stranger who texted her, "I know who killed your son. It's the same guy on Snapchat who killed my Hector." The 2 mothers develop a friendship. They discover a 3rd mother who'd lost a kid. And that kid, a little older, had died, allegedly again, in Smokey's apartment. And here's Smokey taking to Snapchat, where he had been regularly posting pictures of his guns, his gang tattoos, his fake Adderall, fake Xanax, fake Oxys, proudly, blatantly posting his lifestyle and his inventory on a regular basis to Snapchat. For months and months, the DEA, who swooped in to take over Alex's case, were chasing Smokey and trying desperately to set up a deal with him. Not so that they could arrest and try him for the murders of these 3 kids. That proved impossible. But to do a buy and bust off of him for what in California is narco trafficking weight, which is an enormous number of pills. So in other states in the country, if you're caught with 50 Oxycontin, 75 fake Adderall, you can go away for 15 years. In California, thanks to Prop 47, it is virtually impossible not only for you to be charged, it is virtually impossible to detain you with cash bail. So Smokey had been arrested, it turns out, 8 times in the span of 3 years, with guns, with drugs, child endangerment. None of it mattered. He was kicked loose within hours or days. It was Amy Neville, mother of Alex, who discovered who Smokey was, who alerted the DEA, who then subsequently wrote to Snapchat, sent them a subpoena, an order of retention for Smokey's digital data, and waited and waited and waited to hear back from Snapchat. And months passed. What finally came back from Snapchat about Smokey had absolutely nothing to do with the guy who was actually Smokey, and was instead some gibberish about some user named Ronald. Well, the feds knew who Smokey was, but again, unless they caught him with narco trafficking weight, they were never going to be able to arrest and charge him. And then they finally set him up for the big buy, and just days before the feds arrested A.J. Smokey and sent him down for life on a narco trafficking kingpin charge, his Snapchat account inexplicably disappeared.
Why do you think they would do that at that time?
We don't know, but 2 days, 3 days, a day, it's unclear exactly what day his account disappeared. But just before that happened, Amy Neville, this extraordinary mother, assembled this really impactful parent rally on the doorstep of Snapchat's headquarters in Santa Monica. The first major public demonstration against a social media company. There were 100 plus parents carrying pictures, posters, placards of their dead children, signs that said, Snapchat is an accomplice to my child's murder. That rally was covered by countless local, regional, national outlets. It became an enormous story overnight. Those parents became an enormous story overnight. Suddenly they were all over the talk shows, the doctor shows, Dr. Phil, Amy Neville, more than all of them. And so a day, 2, 3 after that rally outside Snapchat's headquarters, Amy Neville gets a phone call from a Snapchat executive asking her for the username of the gangster who killed Amy Neville's child. This is now a full year after Alex Neville died. And Neville, who was furious at Snapchat, furious at the DEA, hung up the phone saying, I'd never help you people. Mind you, she had been told by DEA that they'd subpoena Snap twice and gotten nothing back from them of any use. A year later, when she's at this board meeting of parents who've lost children to Snapchat dealers, she learns from a DEA agent who was also at that meeting about the planned buy and bust of Smokey the summer before. So the board meeting is in June of 22. Smokey was supposed to have been arrested and sent to prison for the rest of his life in June of 21 when the rally happened. Neville gets on the phone with the DEA and says, with the boss of the LA office of the DEA, and says, did what I think happened just happen? I got a phone call from a Snap executive on June 7th, and now you're telling me that that's the day that Smokey's account vanished from Snapchat? Did Snapchat tip him off? Did Snapchat disappear his account because? And that DEA senior leader told Amy Neville, I don't know, but something's fishy. We sent them an order of retention. We sent them an order of non-disclosure. And we open our laptops to finalize the deal with Smokey. And lo and behold, he's gone. And when Smokey disappeared, so did any chance of catching his accomplice and fellow gangster, a user named Arnaldo8286, who just a couple of months after Alex died, sold fake Percocets to a beautiful young church kid named Danny Elijah Figueroa. Danny had just sent his mother a text saying, "Mommy, let's go read our Bibles tomorrow and get coffee." An hour after he sent that text, but we're not sure he sent it. We know he wrote it. It was on his phone. Mm-hmm. His grandmother opened his bedroom door and found him fixed in the prayer position, dead. And his mother, an equally heroic woman named Perla Mendoza, pushed and pushed and pushed the Long Beach Police Department to investigate the murder of her child. When the homicide detective immediately sent a search warrant to Snapchat. Now, it's really hard to get a search warrant on a Snapchat dealer. First of all, Snapchat is ephemeral and exists only in cyberspace. Second of all, you have to demonstrate to a judge that you have probable cause to believe that Arnaldo8286 had actually killed someone in order to obtain a search warrant. That detective sent that search warrant to Snapchat within weeks of Danny Elijah's death. 4 months later, heard back from Snapchat saying, "Nah, your search warrant's deficient." It omitted a couple of sentences of boilerplate language that you forgot to cut and paste. It is therefore deficient. Try again. 6 months elapsed between Danny Elijah's death on September 15th, 2020, and Snapchat finally removing the account of Arnaldo8286, despite months of desperate pleas from Perla Mendoza, Danny Elijah's mother, to please delete his account before Arnaldo killed other kids. Mind you, during those 6 months, Arnaldo was posting constantly onto his live feed, his Snapchat stories, Snap Maps, live stream video of himself at a Fairfield Inn in Southern California with a room full of drugs, a suite full of drugs, guns, and his account stayed up until at least mid-April of 2021. So let's pull back for just a second. That phone call I got from the DOJ linked me to 3 very veteran DEA officials who then connected me with active or just retired DEA agents who were working these cases to the exclusion of every other kind of case. Bill Bodner, special agent in charge of the LA DEA field office, had either visited or had his senior case agents visit 400 homes of dead children by the spring of 2022, and had tried to work all 400 of those fatal poisoning of children, and had an extraordinarily high closure rate, meaning they had gotten convictions on 5% of them. It was unheard of, is unheard of by any other law enforcement agency in America. The point is, it is hellishly hard to make cases against drug dealers who operate on a social media platform where all content vanishes, either when it's viewed or within 24 hours. So drug dealers can and do sell every possible formulation of fentanyl every day on social media. but especially on an app that leaves no breadcrumbs for the cops, sheriff's deputies, or federal agents to trail.
But Snapchat says that they are proactive in removing drug content and drug dealers from their platform. So where's the disconnect here? What did you find? Are they proactive in this?
So I spoke to, I believe it was 15 cops, by the way, homicide cops, special agents for the DEA, Homeland Security officials, sheriffs, and sheriff's deputies. What I heard from all of them in tones of outrage, exhaustion, futility, despair was that when they outreached Snapchat, they either got nothing back or they waited months, weeks, and then got back data that was useless in their investigation. Again, if this is 2 or 3 cops, if this is 2 or 3 parents, if this is an ambulance chasing law firm, it's a story I never, ever would have spent a third or fourth day reporting. But what I saw within the first week of reporting out this story was that this was an enormous national health crisis, that cops, deputies, federal agents were utterly stymied, that attempts to get the most basic of child safety laws passed in the United States Congress and Senate were hopelessly blockaded. That I realized this is a story, A, that hasn't been told, and B, is going to take as long and as much money as it needs in order to get to the bottom of it. I spent 9 months reporting the story. I've never spent more than 3 months on a story in my 35-year-long career. So, when I spoke to Snapchat, and I did for the better part of 5 months, I asked them pointed question after pointed question in response to their claims that they work closely with the DEA, closely with local law enforcement, to point me to one of those cops, to point me to one of those federal agents, to point me to one of those investigations, that their cooperation, that their digital returns had been meaningful in helping to make a case against the Snapchat dealer. I got nothing back. What I got were responses that could easily have been drafted by Snap's AI assistant about why it was impossible, because of the law, to direct me to a cop or a federal agent with whom they worked, why it would compromise a criminal investigation if they gave me any specifics about what kind of data they returned. Most of all, though, I asked them why, when they became aware in 2017 that drug dealers had moved from schoolyards and street corners to Snapchat to sell what were then party drugs, ecstasy, Special K, to children, why they hadn't immediately posted warnings, why they hadn't immediately held a press conference to say, parents, children, beware. There are predators on our site. There are predators on every social media site. Please, if you're outreached by a dealer, if your child is outreached by a dealer, immediately block that user, immediately report them to us. I asked that question over and over to 3 different Snapchat executives, time and again. It's in our terms of service. We have a zero tolerance policy.
But that's not true, Paul. It's not true. Zero tolerance. You're reporting all these drug dealers that were active for a year after they killed a kid. So where's the disconnect? And who's reading the terms and conditions anyway? What's your thought around their response?
I think there are a number of corporate considerations here. One, Snapchat has been losing something on the order of $1 billion a year for the last 7, 8, 9 years. To the best of my knowledge, Snapchat has never turned a profit. Its value on Wall Street seems to be tied entirely to user growth, to showing to investors that they continue to sign up tens of millions of new users every quarter. And again, I'm speculating. It's all we can do because I never got a human response from Snapchat. In months of conversations, in months of email from Snapchat executives that had one tincture of humility, of humanity, of leadership, of responsibility, not one. What I got instead was, when I put to them, there seemed to be two wildly divergent sets of facts here. They are the facts as the cops, parents, prosecutors describe them, namely children, naive, unaddicted children, in some cases, children who have just begun dabbling with drugs, but have no criminal history, have no mental health history, are dying in their beds. What I think the imperative was and remains for Snapchat is to draw as big a distance between itself and the accounts of these children's deaths and any real substantive attempts to dissuade drug dealers and dissuade children from signing up for Snap. Again, its economic model seems to be premised entirely on user growth, and any shadow on its image as a safe space for children, which is how it built its explosive growth from a niche product launched all of 2011 into this enormous titan of social media influence and impact in just a few years. Snapchat went from a couple of thousand users in the fall of 2011 to 140 million within just a couple of years. And an overwhelming percentage of those users are ages 12 to 19. From the very beginning, Snapchat has marketed itself almost exclusively to kids. First, with disappearing content that would let kids text or sext each other as 6th, 7th, and 8th graders without fear of their parents picking up their phones 2 days later and seeing what they'd received. The second brilliant thing that Snapchat did was roll out these features that seemed to be designed exclusively for children. Filters that turn them into kittens and unicorns, geofilters that place them in Paris, Chipotle, these adorable little cartoon avatars. But all those features that encourage kids to think that this had been built, this playground had been built just for them, also predators, drug dealers, cartel adjuncts, those white boy narcos in the middle of nowhere who went from dead-end jobs at eBay to becoming the second or third largest drug dealer on Alphabet almost overnight.
I want to clarify something about Snapchat. So, from what I've learned, all this information I've learned, Snapchat has the ability, which you reference Tim Mackey's technology in the article, and we can talk about that. But Snapchat has the ability to remove most, some, all drug content and drug dealers from their platform or identify them and remove them. Are they not doing it because the engagement from the drug deals and the drug dealers and the children earns them a lot of profits? One. And also because then they would have to acknowledge that their platform has a hand in this epidemic. Would you agree?
So I think, and I am told, that to admit what happened in 2020, which is that their platform was wide open to exploitation by drug dealers, would constitute a very significant legal risk by Snapchat. So Amy Neville didn't just hunt down and identify the gangster who killed her kid. She did something almost unimaginable. She mobilized an army of parents who had lost children to Snapchat dealers, and she did so very quickly. Within 3-4 months of her child's death, she had built not only a foundation, but a national network of mothers and some fathers who, like her, were freshly bereaved and, like her, were angry enough to devote their lives to getting justice for their dead children. And to saving the lives of tens, hundreds, thousands, millions more. So each of these parents in Amy's network travels the country constantly, doing school assemblies, meeting with individual grades, doing huge town halls, flying to DC to sit down with Chuck Schumer, with Dick Blumenthal, and their counterparts on both sides of the aisle in Congress, getting 5 bills to protect children's lives, written, and a few of them actually passed out of major Senate and congressional subcommittees, ready for a full vote, except those bills are never brought to the floor to become law. We'll get into why in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the most extraordinary thing Amy Neville and her parent peers have done was to find first one law firm and then a second law firm with enough money, courage, and passion to file a moonshot lawsuit against Snapchat for the deaths of these children. And 6 months ago, a judge in California gave them the green light to go forward and establish in a courtroom with a jury of their peers the facts about what Snapchat knew, when they knew it, and what they did or didn't do in response to this tsunami of poisoned children. Now, that judge's ruling has been briefly stayed. Snapchat, of course, appealed.
Yep.
We expect an appellate ruling on that motion any day.
Yep.
But what they did was convince a United States judge to bypass, for the very first time, a rule written in 1996 called Section 230C. So what is it? It's a 27, 28 word addendum that essentially declares all firms that operate on the internet and provide a service to third-party users should be treated like the phone companies. Meaning, if you or I conspired to have someone hurt or killed using our Sprint phones, Sprint could not be named as an accomplice to our conspiracy. They merely provided a service. And so, a full decade before Facebook was created, before social media was even contemplated, a rule written in 1996 is the only thing that governs the social media industry. It and it alone has no, what is called in a courtroom, duty of care to its users. What is a duty of care? It is a corporate responsibility not to kill its consumers. So if Ford Motors decides cars aren't really moving off the lot, why don't we try and shave $100 million off manufacturing costs by installing crappy brakes on our new F-150 trucks? Within seconds or minutes of the news of that first fatal crash happening, Ford would be in a world of irrecoverable hurt in criminal and civil court for failing to uphold its duty of care. So Snapchat, Meta, TikTok, Google have no government oversight, have no legal responsibility to protect their users, even the youngest of those users. And so what this judge decreed is that he was going to shove Section 230C to the side and allow both sides, Amy Neville's lawyers and Snapchat, to establish whether Snapchat intentionally, unintentionally contributed to the deaths of those children with not its service, but with the features it designed specifically for children. And within a year, assuming that appeal by Snapchat is denied, we will have a full airing of the facts and establish accountability for the first time in the history of social media. And that never would have happened without Amy Neville and this extraordinarily brave and fearless group of parents who refused to be ignored by Snapchat and its peers in social media.
And listeners can hear my interview and watch my interview with Amy and a lot of other of these same parents that Paul's referencing now. You referenced that no laws have passed in the meantime to protect our kids online, laws that would provide a duty of care like the Kids Online Safety Act. What is the main reason why we haven't been able to pass these laws that will protect our children online?
So I have even less good reporting here than I got Snapchat. What I hear is that the trade organizations and their lawyers are very effective. The trade organizations for the social media giants are very effective at cooling all of this heat, all of this political fervor and bilateral unity to pass a bill that would protect children. I mean, imagine going on record as a senator or congressperson against the passage of a bill like the Kids Online Safety Act, which has languished for years in the House and Senate. Imagine being dumb enough to do that, even in this fraught political atmosphere. Nobody has done it. But all it takes is one congressperson or one senator to put what is called a hold on a bill, and that is enough to keep it off the floor unless enough congresspeople or senators can build a filibuster-proof majority, as I'm led to understand. So what has happened to COSA and the Cooper-Davis Act, Sammy's Law, is the same thing that is happening to less vital legislation every day on Capitol Hill. That said, there is no excuse. This is an act of the most craven political cowardice on the part of Senate leaders, congressional leaders. It is unthinkable that 5 years into this pandemic of child deaths, we are no closer to a government regulatory agency to hold these companies responsible. It is insane that there is nothing to require these companies to meet even their own standards, to meet even the boasts they claim in their terms of service about protecting the health of their users. Frankly, it's going to be your listeners, your viewers, the readers of this story, parents levying irresistible outrage on the people who represent them to get something done. Otherwise, this is going to have to be settled in a court of law where things take forever. It begins by telling every parent in America, pay attention to what your children are logging on to.
Do you feel that Snapchat is currently safe for kids?
I have no way of knowing. I know that for the children who died as a result of buying a pill from a Snapchat dealer, and for the thousands and thousands of kids their parents talk to every month, kids who come up to them after these school assemblies and tell them, I have a friend who died because she bought a pill on Snapchat.
What do you say to parents who think that's not going to happen to my kid? My kid doesn't see that kind of content, or my kid would not, just wouldn't buy a pill online.
To those parents, I say, exactly your kid. That kid who you think is too busy, is too effective, too popular, too high achieving, especially your kid. These aren't the kids at the edges. These aren't the kids who get lost. These aren't the kids who shamble along through their teens. These are the kids at the top of their classes, in the thick of a tribe. The kids who everyone says, no, it couldn't have been that kid. It's always that kid.
And if you want parents to take away one thing from this article, from this investigation or this discussion, what would it be?
Time to have a real talk with your kids. Time to find out what's making them miserable. We know from the Surgeon General, we know from clinical evidence, we know from lawsuit after lawsuit against these social media behemoths, the kids feel horrible about themselves on social media. That social media has been an enormous driver of mental and emotional harms in this country. Whether these are uncomfortable conversations, unimaginable conversations, conversations in which parents feel completely out of their depth, no excuse. Your kid's life depends upon that conversation and upon what you do after that conversation. You cannot be a bystander. There's no riding shotgun. Step up, be heard.
Okay. And lastly, Snapchat is not happy with this reporting of this information. Is there anything we should expect from them? They often will put out marketing campaigns or PR campaigns to try to counteract any negative PR. So anything that parents should be on the lookout for regarding that?
Snapchat has been the subject of a lot of hostile reporting, fair reporting. Almost inevitably, you're right, there is some new marketing campaign. The current one is Snapchat isn't social media. Look at us, we're different. So I expect they'll work very hard in Washington to obliterate the message. And they may come for me too. Oh well, 36 years of doing this, helping to break the NFL concussion scandal, Walter Reed Army Medical Field Hospital scandal, helping to exonerate tens of thousands of wrongly convicted people. I'm ready for it.
Paul, thank you so much. On behalf of parents, we couldn't be more grateful for your covering this. It's worse than I thought. Obviously, I didn't love Snapchat beforehand. I've spoken to all these parents, but having it laid out in this way is super effective. And parents, please spread the word. Keep your kids safe. Like Paul said, have these hard conversations and keep having them. And so, Paul, let's stay connected. And thank you again for doing this.
So much gratitude to you, for you, and to those parents who check in and spread the word.